For Captain Nguyen Van Minh, an officer of the 7th Battalion of the People's Liberation Army, the morning of the last January of 1968 began with the smell of wet clay. The Siuchi tunnels lived their own life, thick, damp, like the earth itself. In the kerosene lamps, light water dripped. Somewhere in the depths, homemade clocks ticked, and above them, just a meter from their heads, another life rustled. A world where people drank tea, set off firecrackers, prepared for the Tet celebration. Above ground there was peace. Below, a storm breathing through the soil. Min sat on an ammunition crate and reread the order printed on thin rice paper. The offensive begins on the night of the Tet holiday. Objective, surprise. The enemy does not expect an attack on the sacred days. The signature was in red ink, General Zyap. He looked up. On the narrow earthen platform in front of him, his men were cleaning their weapons. Kalashnikovs captured M16s, grenades, knives. Boys barely 20, and women carrying water and ammunition. Their faces were calm. They believed they were striking not just the enemy, they were striking the very idea that iron and money could defeat the spirit of a people. Above the earth, laughter thundered. South Vietnamese celebrated. Americans relaxed. On a radio hidden in an earthen niche, American music played. "We gotta get out of this place." Min listened and smiled. They don't know how true that song is. Outside, the air stood still, heavy, smelling of smoke and wet rice. At 3 in the morning, a runner brought the code phrase, "Spring has come." Min put out the lamp. In the tunnels, it was dark as if underwater. Only the breathing of men and the rustle of feet. The unit moved toward the exit. Distant shots became the first notes of the offensive. It all began at once, across the country, Hue, Saigon, Can Tho, Da Nang. Tens of thousands of fighters rose from the earth, as if the soil of Vietnam itself had decided to revolt. Min climbed out. The air was sticky and heavy. To the west, flashes glittered, mortar strikes against Tan Son Hut airfield. He raised his binoculars. Thin tracer lines flashed in the sky on the horizon. The city trembled. Beside him stood Sergeant Doan, thin with burned hands. "Captain, they don't expect it. We caught them sleeping." Min nodded. He knew surprise was their only chance. Within a day, the Americans would raise the sky itself, and every village would become a target. But now the world was on their side. An explosion lit the palms and singed faces. Min did not flinch. He ordered, "Battery 2, to position. Radio, contact the district command. Ammunition, distribute." Everything ran like clockwork. He felt less like a man than part of something greater, a cog in a huge mechanism that had finally moved. And in the moment the first American checkpoint burned, Min thought, "This is our Dien Bien Phu, only the other way around. Now we are the besiegers." But beneath the exultation, fear simmered. He knew the enemy too well. Behind every U.S. soldier stood aircraft, ships, factories. They could replace everything except meaning. He took a photograph from his pocket. His wife, his daughter, his elderly mother, all in Haiphong. He hadn't seen them for 3 years. "If I die," he thought, "let it not be in vain. Let at least one child see the sky without helicopters." At 4:30 a.m., the Americans began to respond. At first in sparse salvos, then more often. Min heard the familiar whop whop whop. The Huey rotors. So they were already up. The napalm flame struck the forest edge. The air ballooned, the ground shook. Several soldiers screamed. One didn't leap back in time. Min clenched his fists, not from fear, but from helplessness. So it will be every day, he thought. We are underground, they are in the sky. But the sky has no patience. He went back down into the tunnel. Above him the storm raged. Below, silence, the smell of earth and human sweat. He felt for the map, red dots marked withdrawal routes, arms depots, and words he had written at night. Patience is also a weapon. When the sun rose, the sky over Saigon turned gray with smoke. There were no clouds, only soot, explosions, and helicopters hovering like predators above the streets. Captain Nguyen Van Minh stood knee-deep in mud, a rifle in his hand, a radio on his back, cracked by shrapnel. His platoon was moving along a ditch beside the highway leading toward the Tan Son Nhut district. The Americans had already recovered. Their response was swift, as if steel itself were avenging its wounded pride. Through wires, over radio waves, through the air came the same sentence. Counterattack in all sectors. And it began. First artillery, then tanks, then the air. From the hills to the west, Pattons fired, their shells blowing apart concrete and air alike. From the sky came the spookies, gunships that circled like devils, spewing thousands of tracer rounds per second. The ground trembled as if the heart of the country were beating just beneath their feet. Minh pressed himself into the earth. The air above him tore apart with explosions. His men ran from ditch to ditch, throwing grenades, firing in short bursts. They fought not for territory, but for presence, to prove to the world that they were still alive, that Vietnam had not bowed. "Captain!" shouted Doan, falling beside him. "They've flanked us on the right." Minh looked. In the distance, figures in camouflage flickered, Americans moving fast, with headsets, flak vests, and flamethrowers. "To the tunnels," he yelled. "Everyone, into the tunnels." The Siu Chi tunnels were their world, warm, alive, like a womb. Underground corridors stretched for kilometers. There were hospitals, depots, command posts, even classrooms for training fighters. But today it was a refuge. They descended into silence, where the only sounds were breathing and the rare drip of water. Minh took off his helmet. His face was black with soot. He wiped his eyes and said, "They believe in machines. We believe in people. Let's see which is stronger." Sergeant Doan smirked, though his eyes were red. "People burn faster, Captain." A rumble came from above. The earth quivered. The Americans must have found one of the entrances. Minh gave the signal, "Light the fuse." A muffled explosion, and the entrance collapsed. They had cut themselves off from the world to survive. Hours passed. The air in the tunnel grew heavy, thick with the smell of smoke and fear. Minh listened to the distant sounds, the drone of helicopters, the crash of artillery, the wail of sirens. He knew Saigon was burning above them, and he thought, "This isn't war. It's a demonstration of power. They aren't fighting, they're showing." He remembered how back in 1965, when the first Americans landed in Da Nang, an old general had told him, "Americans don't know how to lose, but they don't really know how to win either." Now he understood those words. A victory achieved by airplanes and fire means nothing if your enemy refuses to surrender. Minh rose and walked down the tunnel. In one of the chambers lay a wounded man, a young radio operator, maybe 19, his arm bandaged. He was delirious, whispering, "Mama, Mama." Minh bent down, adjusted his bandage, and said quietly, "Hold on. Spring is just beginning." But inside he felt only emptiness. The spring spoken of in party slogans had turned to ash and smoke. He knew even if the Tet Offensive brought them glory, it would not bring victory. The Americans were too vast, Their factories were like entire continents, their planes endless, their soldiers replaceable, like parts. He recalled an American magazine he'd found in a village time. On the cover, a photo of a factory assembling helicopters. The caption read, 1,000 a month, 1,000 machines a month. Vietnam didn't even produce 1,000 bicycles. At that moment, Minh realized the war had long since outgrown the country. It wasn't an army against an army. It was an era against another. They were people of the soil. The Americans were children of the machine. And yet, in that machine, there was a weakness. It didn't know how to wait. By evening, when the noise subsided, he emerged to the surface. The sky still glowed from burning districts. The smell of napalm hung thick and sweet. Far off, the headlights of armored vehicles flickered. Minh looked up. High above, a B-52 passed, heavy as fate itself, heading north toward Hanoi. When a plane flies over you, he thought, it carries not only bombs, it carries an idea that machines can triumph through labor. But he also knew, each night, that plane covers the land in metal, and each morning the earth rises again. Hundreds, thousands of people return to their burrows, repair weapons, dig new tunnels. And no steel can kill what does not fear death. Minh went back underground. On the tunnel wall, someone had written in charcoal, America is strong, but not eternal. He ran his fingers over the words, like over a prayer. From the depths came footsteps. A messenger brought a new order to withdraw west toward Cambodia. Minh nodded. An order is an order. He gathered his men. 42 left out of 80. Faces caked with mud. Eyes like those of animals used to the dark. And yet not one said no. They moved out, not as the defeated, but like a river that sinks underground only to rise again into the light. Late that night, they reached a dried-up riverbed. Above them, Hueys circled, sweeping the ground with searchlights. Each step was a challenge, each breath a prayer. Minh stopped, looked south toward the burning Saigon, and said softly, they came with machines, and we with the earth. Let's see who tires first. The morning was strangely quiet. The sun rose over the charred trees, and for the first time in many days the sky was not humming with engines. Only birds, few timid ones, as if afraid to become targets again. Captain Nguyen Van Minh sat on the bank of a dried-up river, his leg wrapped in a bandage. Around him lay shell casings, shards of metal, burned trees. The world seemed scorched to its very heart. His unit had dissolved into the jungle. Of 80 men, 23 remained. The rest, dead, captured, or gone without a trace into the earth, as everything in Vietnam eventually sinks back into the earth. He felt neither pain nor anger, only a weary astonishment that he was still breathing. In the distance, occasional explosions rumbled, the Americans finishing off the areas where, according to their reports, fighters still hid. But their artillery no longer fired with the same fury as before, as if they too were tired. Minh watched the smoke rising above the plain and thought, here it is, the price of persistence. We lose bodies, they lose meaning. He pulled a crumpled notebook from his breast pocket, a trophy taken from a dead American. On the last page there was a note. I don't understand why we're here. These people don't give up. Every village, every tunnel. It's like the earth itself is fighting. Minh stared at the words for a long time. They were more honest than any official report he had ever read. He turned the page and carefully wrote beneath them in Vietnamese, we don't fight to win. We fight to remain. He leaned back and closed his eyes. The silence rang in his ears, thick and deaf. Faces appeared before him, those of the comrades he would never see again. Doan, who laughed even when everything was burning. Lon, the radio girl who carried grenades in a basket of vegetables. They had lived briefly but honestly. The Americans might live longer, he thought, but they would never understand why. By noon, the heat became unbearable. The air shimmered. 2 scouts emerged from the jungle, young, thin, their faces streaked with dirt. "Comrade Captain," one said, "we've re-established contact with command. We're ordered to move to the border and regroup." Min nodded. He rose, leaning on his rifle, and looked slowly around. "Tell everyone we survived. That's enough." They set out. Along the way they passed burned villages, destroyed bridges, abandoned American trucks. Sometimes bodies. Min walked first, and every step echoed in his head. He felt no hatred for the enemy, only a strange, almost sorrowful understanding. America could burn the jungles but not defeat the rain, could destroy cities but not stop memory. He remembered the words of an old teacher from Haiphong. War is not the struggle of 2 sides. It's the struggle of 2 ways of understanding the world. Now he knew their way was endurance, not resisting iron, but waiting for the iron to rust. Americans measured time in money. Vietnam measured time in blood. And in that arithmetic, the future belonged to those who could wait. When night fell, they found an abandoned temple. The stone statues had crumbled, but the altar had survived. Min lit a small fire and sat before it. The light flickered across his face. He took out a small pouch of soil, a handful from his home village that he always carried with him. He poured a bit into his palm, looked at it, and whispered, "We're still here." He suddenly realized his war was no longer for victory. It was for memory, so that after all the explosions, after all the B-52s and napalm, someone could still say, "We endured." Min looked up. Through the smoke he saw stars, few but bright. For the first time in a long while the sky was clear, and somewhere far away, in the darkness, the hum of helicopters could still be heard, dull, like the distant echo of another age. He thought that maybe this was how wars truly end. Not with a shot, not with an order, but with silence, when both sides suddenly realize they've been firing at each other's reflection. A few days later, they reached the base near the border. They were greeted not with a parade or speeches, but with a bowl of rice and a bucket of water. The district commander shook Min's hand. "You came back. That's already a victory." Min said nothing. He looked down at his hands, thin, caked with dirt and gunpowder. He knew that victory wasn't in cities, flags, or reports. Victory was surviving when the enemy is certain you're dead. That night, he opened the Americans' notebook again and wrote, "They came with helicopters. We answered with earth. They left with machines. We remained with memory." He closed the notebook, set it beside him, and fell asleep, peacefully, for the first time. In his dream, he saw the same land as always, damp, smelling of sweat and rice, but now it was free of blood. Only rain, soft as forgiveness. Years later, after the Americans had gone and new roads had been built in their place, someone would find that old bunker, tangled in roots. Inside would lie a rusted helmet, an old map, and the notebook, written in 2 hands, English and Vietnamese. 2 visions, 2 truths, 2 eras. And perhaps someone would finally understand that the war had never been about weapons or ideology. It had been about time and about those who endured it.